comments about this week's textbook readings. The short story with this week's textbook readings, this is the first week, we have readings, from our actual text. That we have an article by James Rachels, The Challenge of Cultural Relativism. We have an article by Thomas Nagel, Right and Wrong. The big picture of these two things is, first off, Rachels is essentially looking for... Rachel's means is actually critiquing moral relativism. That is what Rachel's has a problem with. But Rachel's the whole time refers to it as cultural relativism. That can be very confusing. When Rachel's is giving examples from anthropologists and historical cases, that's when he's actually talking about, the theory of cultural relativism, which I explained earlier in this video. It's just the observation that cultures differ. No big, thing there. But then he will do his best to show, Rachel's will, that just the observation that cultures differ need not imply anything about whether morality's like that. That's kind of his general tactic. That's the sort of argumentative angle. But then he's also going to point to things that might be good about a relativistic position. So what I would encourage people to do is with Rachel's, you're just seeing someone that's trying to disagree with relativism, that's trying to say, yeah, relativism isn't that good. I mean, that's what Rachel's is up to. I mean, you don't have to buy it. Remember that. You don't have to buy into any of Rachel's stuff. And Rachel's stuff is kind of confusing because it's really moral relativism that he has a problem with. It's just the nature of authors. I mean, just because someone writes an article does not mean that they got all of their terminology straight. It's just something to know now. See, in philosophy, we have no privileged authors. That the authors, every author is just presenting us with their reasons. And they're presenting us with sentences and arguments, and all we do is try to understand their problem, their question they're trying to answer, their argumentation. We want to do that in as charitable light as we can, and we want to analyze what they say. But no one is assumed to be perfect. Anyone we read is subject to critique. They're subject to being right too, but they're also subject to being critiqued. And so what I would encourage people to do with these articles is to go back to that sort of last week. I talked through the philosophical pattern of inquiry, how to approach passages, using it. This is when it comes into play. This is when it is good. Is use it to try to figure out what's going on in Rachel's article. Like, for example, consider what problem might have motivated Rachel's to write The Challenge of Cultural Relativism. Remember that philosophical pattern of inquiry, it always starts with what's the problem. In the case of an ethical conflict, it's going to be an ethical moral value conflict. But in the case of this Rachel's article, it's something else. Like, every author has an agenda. Every time you approach an article in a class like this, or a video, in terms of something we watch, from YouTube or whatever, or just approach it as, what is the agenda? What is this person saying all these words for in my direction? If you can identify that by read through the article or watch a video all the way through, and then ask yourself, what is the agenda? What was their motivation for writing all these words that I just read? Or listening to all these words. What were they trying to accomplish? And you do that, and if you can't see the agenda immediately, that's fine. You move to the next steps in the pattern. Go into what overall question is the article trying to deal with. But if you can see that problem after you read through it, that typically helps you see the questions. It focuses you. Well, the agenda with Rachel's article, it might be something like, Rachel's at base is a moral objectivist. And he sees any form of relativism as being a direct challenge to his adopted position. He's a moral objectivist. He is not going to be friendly to relativism. It's just the way of it in these positions. And the idea is, well, he may want to make relativistic positions look bad, or less appealing. He may be trying to persuade us that relativism is not as good as we might think it is. You see, he's trying to kind of ease us away from buying into relativism. He'd rather us buy into something else, or at least not buy that. It's kind of like the commercial that tells you, oh yeah, we don't really care if you buy our product, but we certainly don't want you to buy our competitor's product. I mean, you'll rarely see a commercial like that, but there have been commercials like that where, yeah, Tide detergent, we think it's awesome, but even if you don't buy Tide, you certainly don't want to buy, over there, Purell or whatever. I mean, it's not necessarily always the most effective way of arguing or selling something, but it is a tactic, and so that's what is likely the problem. I've given you an indication of what the problems and all these things are in my words here, but you need to verify that and see for yourself. I could make a mistake in my, like people applying this pattern of philosophical inquiry, like what is the problem, what are the questions, what are the answers, the reasons. We can have divergent interpretations of that. And that does not mean that we're necessarily wrong in our interpretations, but typically we should be able to reach common ground eventually. But it's like, what's the overall question? The article may be attempting, Rachel's might be attempting to answer. Well, should we buy into or adopt a morally relativistic position? That tends to be the main question he's looking for. But now you just use these and you confirm them. I'm just giving you something to work with while you're reading. If your analysis differs, then that's fine. But I think everybody will pretty much see this same thing when they're reading. And so what answer does he propose or defend? Like, well, this looks like his thesis statement. When we analyze relativism, we find that it is not so plausible as it first appears to be. I would encourage people to go and find that exact sentence. It's not on the first page. It's like 3 pages in. So in some argumentation, some articles we read this semester, the author's main claim may be embedded deeply. They may say a whole lot and talk through a whole lot of examples before you ever get to the point where it's like you could insert, I will argue that, in front of something. And that takes practice. Like, this is something, if you don't want to get lost in what's the problem, what's the question, one thing you can always do with any articles or videos that you see this semester is ask, what is the author's thesis statement? What is their major claim that all their words are in some way meant to support? What is their thesis, their conclusion? What is that? If you can find the thesis, like this is Rachel's thesis, by the way. Yes, I would encourage people to actually find it for themselves. I deleted the cultural out of front of relativism here. But the idea is go in there, find it, look at the context of it, and what you'll see is that as soon as an author launches their major claim or their thesis statement in philosophical ethical articles, typically they're immediately going to start giving you reasons or, working through, reasons to believe that they're trying to support that claim. Everything they do is going to be tailored to supporting that thesis statement. That's the way it's supposed to work in argumentation, and in our articles, that's what every author will be endeavoring to do. We do get good examples of people trying to make a thesis statement or a conclusion and then offer reasons for it. The articles in the textbook, I'm not saying they're the best, but I didn't pick the textbook. We just have to use it. I don't select the textbook. That's selected by someone above me. So I guess there is a sort of relativistic quality to this. The textbook you use is in relation to someone else that picked it, and I just, I work for the college, and this is the one we use. But the idea is every article we do read, one of the good things about those articles in the Con textbook is that every one of them will have a thesis statement, every one of them will have reasons. And keep in mind that the thesis statement is just the answer to whatever the overall question is. So notice the overall question. So if you find the thesis statement, you can reverse it back up to the question that the author is going to answer. Like, yeah, the question, should we buy into or adopt a morally relativistic position? This indicates no, we perhaps shouldn't. When we analyze, it doesn't look as plausible. So Rachel's is given a no to that question. So if you can find the thesis, then you can reverse what question it answers. And if you get what question it answers, then you can typically ask, well, why would the author want to answer this question or provide an argumentative defense of an answer to it? That'll give you their agenda. So you can work from thesis statement back up to the other two steps often. And so if you do nothing else when you approach these articles in this class and the videos and stuff that'll be posted throughout the weeks, look for the thesis statement, in anything we're reading ethics related. And then I've said some more words here. I'm not going to read all of them, but that's the task. Like, use that pattern of inquiry to help yourself make sense of it. That's what it's there for. It's a way to access complicated prose. And then Nagel, what are our words about Nagel? Nagel is a moral objectivist too, of a sort. So him and Rachel's, what we're seeing this week is one moral objectivist that is critiquing moral relativism. And in Nagel, we are seeing just almost an outright defense of a sort of moral objectivist principle. That Nagel's going to defend this sort of thing that he thinks scopes over all people. The notion that if you have a reason not to hurt someone else, or it works like this, it's like if you think that other people have a reason not to hurt you, then by that very fact, the way consistency works is you should also think you have a reason not to hurt them. And then he creates a neat defense with some examples of it. And then at the end, though, he tells you, and this is the giveaway, like this is a quote from the Nagel reading for this week. The basis of morality is a belief that good and harm to people or animals is good or bad, not just from their point of view, but from a more general point of view, which every thinking person can understand. You see that every thinking person, he went beyond groups at that point. And then he keeps specifying it, that it goes beyond your family, your friends. He's emphasizing that this is like a supra, principle that he's dealing with. He's pointing us in the direction of moral relativism. So Nagel's tactic essentially is to present reasoning in support of the idea that, there are some principles that every person can buy into. And then he's not going to say it, but he is pointing to it here, that he's making the claim that morality itself is based off of something more than just relativistic group membership. That it's based off of something that scopes over all of humanity. And so that's that notion. There's the way humanity sometimes appears in things. Every thinking person can understand. So that's implying not only just humanity in general, but rational thinking humanity. Reasonably educated, intelligent people. That's what he's pointing to. Like, everyone in this class. But that's just his claim. I mean, you don't have to, his claims and his way of thinking. You don't have to buy into what Nagel's saying. But he's an example of how moral objectivists will tend to argue. Where they're always on the hunt for these sort of general principle things. And then note that most of the ethicist moralists that we'll tend to encounter, ethicist moralist, that's just synonym I'm using there. They mean the same thing for our purposes. They'll tend to be committed to some form of moral objectivism. But not all. Just keep in mind, there are some absolutists we'll encounter. We won't encounter many relativists or subjectivists, but we will, when we go out into public in everyday life. You encounter lots of them, actually. Or people who think they're that or want to be that. They may be mishmash, but they tend to want to think that they're, one of those positions. But I think that everybody, we've done a good talk through of the positions, the pros and cons of each. We got a sense of what this week's discussion, what the task is, and also kind of what the readings are, how to approach them, to use that pattern of inquiry that I've talked about the previous weeks to get access to it. So we can understand what these people are arguing for. And Nagel and Rachel's, they're They're just examples of the way these kind of arguments can play out, when people are talking about the positions. But I hope this video has been helpful. Definitely let me know if there's any questions. Just send me an email. We'll go from there. But I look forward to seeing what everybody does in this week's discussion. It should be a really good one. Until then.